Community Scrutiny Committee. I'm Councillor Nigel Pepper, Chairman of this committee. Can I remind you that the audio-visual feed of this formal public meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and with this in mind, I'd like to welcome members of the public watching this live. I'd like to begin with a health and safety announcement. There is no fire drill planned this morning. In the event of the fire alarm sounding, we will need to leave the council chamber through the rear doors and leave the building through the reception into the front car park and wait there. Can also remind everyone to ensure their mobiles, laptops and iPads are on silent for the duration of this meeting. Also, may I remind you that the hearing loop is now activated. Requests to speak will be collated by my scrutiny officer, Kiara. When invited to speak, you should press the button on your microphone unit to make it live. Then press again when you finish your contribution. We'll now move on to the formal agenda. Agenda item 1 is apologies for absence replacement councillors. So over to you, Trina.
Thank you, Chairman. We've received apologies from Councillor Stokes, and we have Councillor Ashton as his replacement member today. We've also received an apology from Councillor King, and just to let you know, Councillor King is going to observe the meeting today, Chairman, via Teams. Thank you.
Okay, and thank you. Item 2, declarations of councillors' interests. Do any members wish to declare any interests? No, thank you. Item 3, minutes of the previous meeting of the Public Protection and Community Scrutiny Committee, which was held on the 19th of April. This is on pages 5 to 14 of the agenda. I'll just go through those just to check for accuracy only. So page 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, and last one is page 14. Okay, thank you. So do I have a proposer for those minutes, please? Councillor Dunny, thank you. Thank you. And a seconder, please. Councillor Mrs. Brockway. We will now vote. You'll vote on whether you agree that the minutes are a correct record. So all those in favour, please raise your hand. Thank you. Those against? Any abstentions? Just one. Councillor Ashton, thank you. Oh, sorry, and Councillor Key, sorry. Okay, item 4. That's announcements by the Chairman, Executive Councillors and Lead Officers. I have no announcements as such this morning, but we have a light agenda today with one pre-decision scrutiny item. All reports to be presented are taken as read. Therefore, may I request that presenters summarise key points of their report submitted and also remind members the importance of succinct questions and contributions that will allow for using the time allocated for each discussion effectively. I'd like to welcome Councillor Stephen Rowe, who has attended this meeting in his support executive capacity today, and to welcome his contributions to the debates. Moving on, are there any executive councillor announcements? Do you have any executive councillors with us today? We've got Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. If I may, I've come this morning to speak specifically around one of the papers, so I'll save any comments until then.
Okay, thank you. Do we have any others via Teams, Kiara?
Not at
wishing
this point.
to speak? Okay, thank you. Are there any senior officers here which wish to speak? And none of those via Teams? Okay, thank you. Okay, got it now. So we move on to the agenda proper now with agenda item 5, which is Multiply Adult Numeracy Programme in Lincolnshire. This is a pre-decision scrutiny item. The report can be found on pages 15 to 26 of the agenda pack and invites the committee to consider a report regarding the Multiply Adult Numeracy Programme in Lincolnshire, which is due to be considered by the Executive Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning sometime between the 13th and 17th of June. The views of this committee will be passed on to the Executive Councillor as part of their consideration of this item. The report will be presented by... I've got a D missing, sorry about that. Mandy Ram, yeah? Funding and Investment Manager, Infrastructure Investment, and Thea Croxall, Adult Learning and Skills Manager, Economic Development. In regards to our actions, the committee is invited to firstly consider the report and determine whether we support the recommendations to the Executive Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning as set out in the report. The recommendations of this report are set out on pages 7 to 18 and are that the Executive Councillor, 1, supports the submission of the Multiply Investment Plan to the Department for Education to deliver a 3-year numeracy programme that tackles the known and emerging numeracy problems in Lincolnshire based on the general principles referred to in paragraphs 1.13 and 1.14 of the report. And 2, delegates to the Executive Director, place in consultation with the Executive Councillor for Economic Development, Environment and Planning, how many times have I said that this morning, authority to determine the final form of and to submit the investment plan. Okay, we're also asked to agree that our comments are passed on to the Executive Councillor for his decision. So over to you, Mandy and Thea. Sorry, Mandy, your name's wrong on your card too.
Well, yeah, I'll answer to anything. Thank you very much. Thea unfortunately can't be with us today. So I'd like to thank you, Chair and Scrutiny, for the opportunity to present to you about the Multiply programme. So it's a brand new programme, brand new investment for the county, announced in April 22. It's intended to provide access to free, flexible numeracy provision for those residents aged 19 and above who do not already hold a GCSE Grade 4 qualification or its equivalent. In respect to the published report, I'd just like to focus and draw your attention to some context for the programme and the funding, the process to access it, and also the benefits to Lincolnshire. So in terms of the context, this funding is a key component of the government's levelling up agenda, and it seeks to support underperforming areas to level up to UK average in anything from skills, education, productivity or health and wellbeing. There are 12 levelling up missions, and this kind of comes under mission 6 and 5. 6 states that by 2030 the number of people successfully completing high quality skills training will have significantly increased in every area of the UK. And mission 5 sets out that targets sets out targets so that 90% of primary school children achieve the required standards in reading, writing and maths also by 2030. The logic behind that is that improved skills equate to an individual being able to reach their full potential, and that means career choices, job progression, opportunity and well-being. Better jobs effectively equates to better pay. In terms of moving to that 2030 goal, improved numeracy is seen as a critical foundation to this, and accordingly UK Shared Prosperity Fund, which is the replacement for European structural investment funds, has allocated £559 million to Multiply as outlined in the report. It's based on needs and also what was also received from European funding previously, and accordingly the government has awarded £4 million to the county to deliver locally designed interventions over the next 3 years, so designed to our needs. This is an excellent opportunity to help those adults in Lincolnshire whose numeracy skills hold them back both from progressing in life and in work. The process to access this funding is the County Council has been nominated by government as the lead authority. The £4 million, as I say, is needs-based, and we have to prepare an investment plan as outlined in the report and submit it to the Department for Education for its consideration by the end of June. This will set out the types of delivery and the success measures of our local programme. It will set out the needs that we will identify along the way, its strategic alignment with the various plans that's been approved around skills and growth, and it will also set out opportunities for collaborating with partners, the risks and the annual spend around what we've been allocated already by government. And then what we would do is need to draw off a menu of interventions that's already been provided in the Multiply prospectus. These are listed in the report under 1.13, but unfortunately I don't think the bold is replicated in that report in the published version. So just for clarity, We are focusing in on the moment on items A, B, C, H and I, and that's courses designed to increase confidence in those using maths as a first step towards formal numeracy qualifications, courses designed to help people use numeracy to manage money, which is particularly pertinent at the moment, innovative numeracy programs delivered together with employers, numeracy courses aimed at those 19 or above that are leaving or have just left the care system, and numeracy activities that are designed and delivered with community organisations and partners, so that we are able to reach those very hardest to reach people and perhaps even introduce them to learning for the first time. In the lead up to the submission, we have been engaging with a variety of groups. These are outlined in the report, and that's in order to explore within those kind of parameters of the menu of interventions that we are delivering it in innovative ways and making that transformational change. The Learning and Work Institute has been commissioned to help us identify geographical need based on data that's available at the moment, and that will produce a mapping tool so we really get into the kind of weeds of it. And once the investment plan has been agreed with the Department for Education, the Council will be issued a grant determination letter and a memorandum of understanding, and delivery will commence hopefully in September 22, and that will be through the adult learning team in growth. In terms of the benefits to Lincolnshire, very briefly, it's a great opportunity to promote adult learning to brand new audiences, to reassert the value of learning to others as a means of job progression, career choice and future well-being, something that isn't normally or isn't always accepted and seen as a route to progression, and to engage with Lincolnshire businesses to help them design delivery to meet their own individual needs and to support their recruitment, retention and work development. It also offers an opportunity for the Council to look at new and expanded delivery and to work with different partners. A particular interest is, of course, the community groups and organisations that can help us build on work that's already underway within growth as we seek to deliver the Council's UK Community Renewal Fund activity. And critically, Multiply cannot duplicate or displace any activity already being delivered through the adult education budget. So all of that activity will embrace that, complement and wrap around, and it'll establish numeracy and learning foundations with individual learners that can then build to that GCSE level 4 and beyond. The logic of this is that this will then lead, where appropriate, into higher levels of learning through that adult learning programme in the county, and then collectively deliver that higher skilled workforce that will in turn deliver growth and economic development in Lincolnshire. That's really all I wanted to set out, and happy to take whatever questions members may have.
Okay, thank you. I'd now like to invite members of this committee to comment on the item. Chiara, do we have any speakers?
Not as yet.
Not as yet. Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. On page 20, it mentions about courses, etc., and the course programmes. In your statement, you said you were putting something together. Have we been able to borrow, as it were, or learn best practice from another area, or literally are we the first ones to go forward with this programme? Thank you.
Every area's got an allocation across the UK, and what we have done is reach out to peers across the East Midlands, and we've been participating in a number of webinars that the Department for Education have organised for us, so that we are picking up what people are doing, what might be best practice that we can build on. And we also don't want to lose our own best practice, so we don't want to reinvent the wheel where we don't need to. We want to make sure that we can hit the ground running in year 1 and build on that in years 2 and 3. So definitely listening to best practice opportunities.
Oh, sorry. How can we find these people and be able to interact with them and get them to join the course? Because obviously some people have a fear, or they don't wish to let people know that they're suffering from these lack of skills and therefore might not want to step forward and engage. Thank you.
Absolutely, and that's a critical part of the engagement process at the moment. We're finding that some of the harder to reach individuals may not have engaged at all in learning, and or some individuals who are actually in work. We've been told in a call yesterday with the Department of Work and Pensions that they tend to be very good at masking some of their weaknesses in maths and literacy. So if we can work with an employer to provide informal settings, lunchtime breaks, bring along your packed lunch or whatever, and kind of look at ways that you can employ maths in everyday life. I mentioned in my presentation about how to manage money. We may be able to pick up things then and build to how you undertake stock control within the workplace, or weights and measures if that's appropriate to their job. It's a case of engage very informally in a very safe environment and then build and build to getting closer to some sort of maths qualification. In terms of other people outside of businesses and may not be employed, I think it's critical and really quite exciting to be working with community organisations to try and engage with these people. I mentioned in the presentation about UK Community Renewal Fund. This was something that we've invested nearly £800,000 with Abbey Access training, and 8 different charities have come together to really go into ground level individual engagement through the football club, through existing community groups and various approaches, and this is going to be able to help us identify individuals and get best outputs for them.
Thank you very much for that, and glad to hear that you've really connected with 8 different organisations, because that was one of my other questions, so you've answered that. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. We've got Councillor Key, followed by Councillor Brockway.
Yes, thank you. Well, Councillor Clark actually asked what I was going to ask in his second question, but I do think it is a problem when you mentioned this masking business, where people are sometimes very reluctant to admit that they need a bit of help with these sort of things. I can certainly agree with that. The other thing I was going to bring up was the funding over the 3 years. This year's allocation, obviously 22-23, as you put in the report, we're part way through this year already. If we don't spend that money this year, can it be carried over to next year, or do we lose this some or all of this 1.2 million? Thank you.
Unfortunately, we've tried to lobby for that ourselves and other authorities. We do lose it if we can't spend it in year 1. There is a degree of flexibility in years 2 and 3 to kind of roll that money across, but year 1 will be around performance. But one of the biggest kind of areas of activity is going to be marketing, so that we get that message out there and that engagement. So if we don't spend it, we will be realistic. That's what the Department for Education has asked us to do, or to be. So we will try and maximise the spend to best effect and get that into Lincolnshire, but we will be realistic.
How confident are you that we're going to, because obviously it'd be a shame to not use the money because there's people desperate for it. What can we do in terms of publicity, particularly to get this money spent, you know, because it will make a real difference?
We are absolutely aware it's very, very challenging, and every authority is feeling this at the moment. If we can get the approval in September and to start delivering some activity and to build up the marketing, then I think we'll try and get the best part of that funding out of the door in year 1, but it will be challenging.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. This is very good news that this money is coming into the area. Schools put a huge amount of effort into making sure that their children go through Maths and English GCSE because they're fundamental to further qualifications and jobs. What this means really is that a lot of those who are disaffected for whatever reason are identified by the time they're 16 and sooner, but certainly by the time they're 16, because the effort to achieve GCSEs is huge. I wonder, is there any possibility that we could engage with the schools to have, you know, with GDPR considered and all the rest of it, to learn who those children are so that we can start engaging with them before they reach 19, so that we can put some things in place and draw them towards a desire to do these courses. Some of them do feel that it's sort of over when they're 16, and that's very, very sad. So I just wonder if we could engage a bit earlier to bring them in. Thank you.
I'll be perfectly honest, I'm not a practitioner in this area, but certainly we can look at the options, as you say, GDPR and everything else notwithstanding, but I see no reason why we can't make those efforts to try and engage, even if it's to be advised what groups and organisations exist there that we can perhaps engage with that we aren't already on our list, but we can certainly take that on board.
Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will have two questions. The first thing, I will start with page 19, where it states, East Lindsey, Boston and South Holland performing worst in the county. Now, are we going to give priority to these areas when we start spending the money or coming out with the program? That's my first question. Thank you.
As I said in the presentation, we've got the Learning and Work Institute to look at where the biggest pockets of deprivation and need for numeracy are, but we will not specifically be focusing on East Lindsey, Boston and South Holland. It is about provision across the whole of the county, but if we obviously pick up pockets in those areas, it's identified as the greatest need, we will provide that kind of support. As I mentioned, the Abbey Access Training's work in Lincoln, in particular, will use that learning and replicate that as well. So it's open for everybody. It's, you know, obviously these areas I would suggest are probably more in need from a community perspective, but the businesses may lay elsewhere who need that progression and support for their existing workforce.
Thank you. My other question is coming from the reality of life. And I do believe that Boston has probably more than 30% of EU citizens. And what I have noticed in you know, dealing with people from the EU, especially from Romania and Bulgaria, I will say 90% are illiterate. They can't read, they can't write. And these people are working in factories. And talking to some people who work with them in factories, they say it's very hard to communicate with them. It's hard for them to speak English. It's hard for them to learn. And my perception on this is having these people in town, and we're not pushing them to learn, despite, I think, Haven High are giving free lessons in English, they're going to pull us down. How can we communicate with these people, especially they are not members of any groups or any activities? All they do is work, and probably that's it for them. So can you tell us how we're going to deal with that, and if we can get them towards, you know, to learn more? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you.
I think in terms of that, then will come down to getting into the right businesses, as you say. Many are employed through factories, etc. So it's working with the employers to sell the opportunity to them and the benefits to the business. There are elements where we can incentivise to support the business and then to support the individual. How that works through in practice, we've still got to kind of address. But we could certainly, I mentioned about lunchtime breaks, opportunities to engage with those individuals. And it doesn't mean that we just have to focus on the numeracy. There is flexibility within that, and we could address the language barriers as well. It's absolutely pointless trying to, you know, some of the terminology within numeracy, even at a very basic entry level, they need to be able to understand that to be effective for them. So we will build that into any course offer, and I think the best way to kind of access these people will probably, in this case, the example you give is through the businesses direct.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Crikey, that was quick.
Thanks. It was just a short one, really. I know I'm very much a trade union activist, and I know Unison and other unions, Unite, they have programmes where they have union-funded learning, and they do things like, it was Book Week a couple of weeks ago, and they do all sorts of stuff. And that, when I was more active, we did stuff on lunchtime breaks, and that as a rep, we'd stand outside the hospital canteen, with that sort of thing. Do you engage and work with the trade unions? Do you work alongside them, or is it very separate to that? Thank you.
It is separate at the moment, but it's certainly something we can pick up and explore. We have spoken to the NHS as well and their talent programme. Very interested in working with us to get into that workforce. And I mean, I think some of the kind of figures we were giving yesterday, there's 8,500 people being employed, and when they offer numeracy provision, they've got virtually zero take-up. If we address it in a different way, a different approach, not just numeracy, then we could think we can actually drive up the kind of engagement using their existing networks. So certainly the same applies to kind of working with the unions.
Can I just come back,
Yeah,
Chair,
sure.
just briefly? Yeah, because I mean, and it's just that I know the NHS. We're not just talking about nurses, we're talking about the cleaners and the healthcares and the porters and people like that. And there's loads of literacy and numeracy stuff. And I've got your email from this, so I will email you and we can have a discussion on that, because I think you could perhaps learn from each other, and they might be able to sort of advise you some of the things they've done and where you could go. I think it might be useful. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I've got Councillor Mrs Clark, followed by Councillor Sneath.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for that report. I just want to ask a bit more, if I may, about people who are not in work and who are not in education. So there's a gap of those people there. How are we going to reach those people, and where will they feel most comfortable talking about a skill that they don't have, or that they don't feel confident about? And how are we going to reach them, and which buildings are we going to use? Because like my colleagues have said, you can feel quite intimidated if you haven't got a skill like that. And then if you're expected to go to, say, the local college in Lincoln, and you have also a language barrier, and you may not be very good with literacy, you are not going to come forward for what is ideally a very good package. And also, Karen's just mentioned there, my colleague, about the union support. I'd forgotten that, actually, Karen. It's brilliant that unions do support that in the workplace. That gap of that group of people that are maybe dropped out of school a bit too early, have not really had the support they could have needed, or might be a bit more challenging, and haven't had the opportunity really to sit down and learn one-to-one, or perhaps with a bit more intensive support. How are we going to reach those people? Because there are those people around, certainly in my division, there are enough people like that who would benefit from a programme like this. And I would actually like to see the uptake down to, I know it's probably going to be impossible, but down to division, so that it makes more sense to me, so that I can see how that's working across the St Giles division and also across my neighbour's division in Ermine, because often we'll link up and do things together. Thank you.
I think you're spot on with that question. What we're trying to do, and if we say, I'm referring it to numeracy, but we're going to hide that in every shape and form at the entry level. This is about engaging people through creative ways. It could be through the creative industries, as an example, you know, sort of one of a colleague in the East Midlands, Derby, I think it is. They're engaging with harder to reach youth groups through music, and they'll try and build to kind of launching into kind of the principles of numeracy, but shielding it the way we talk about people mask their inabilities, will mask the fact that this is maths. We want them to engage in the first instance and then build. In terms of the buildings, yes, there will be some provision within kind of colleges, etc., but the vast focus of that will be in the areas that people are comfortable in. So we've mentioned the workplace, but we've also We'll work with Citizens Advice Bureau. I've mentioned Abbey Access Training as one example, and there are many others. So we'll work with them to look at the settings that these people may be comfortable in. It may be young people's kind of organisations, etc. We are also exploring something like a mobile bus or something that could go take that learning into a setting and into a particular division or whatever it may be. We've got to look at that, whether that's going to be eligible. That's one concept we are exploring. So it's the principles. We're not there yet. I can't tell you the actual buildings. We're still in that consultation phase. But absolutely take that learning to where it's needed, rather than take them into a setting that's either alienating, daunting, or what have you. We have to break down those barriers.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Sneath.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. Yeah, whilst I appreciate the need for everybody to get a qualification or two, and it is important, I'm really as concerned about, in the sense of numeracy, about people, particularly this age group, understanding how numeracy and understanding your money relates to everything every day. For example, understanding your bills, working out percentages to see whether what you're spending, whether you buy 2 of something to save money or whatever, and again, checking your supermarket bills. You know, how many times do I check mine and found I've been charged twice for something? I think people are almost scared of numeracy. They think it's something highfalutin. It isn't. It's about every day, the pennies we all spend, and at the moment, that's even more important.
Sure.
I do blame the reliance on mobile phones for a lot of things. Nobody knows how to work things out in their head anymore, do they? Like people my age do. Because we've lost that ability. Young people have lost that ability. They'll work everything out on their phone. And I think it's about making this, people realise it's just about the money that's in your pocket, and it's really important we make it more easily understood for them, as well as the fact we'd like them to pass an odd exam or two. Thanks very much. Thank you.
Okay. Mandy, would you like to come back on that?
Again, that's something we'll definitely it's so of its time at the moment with the cost of living crisis and people being able to understand those sorts of things. It's a maths teacher who now works for us in a different capacity was explaining to me the other day that 2 lots of 10% are different to 20% of something, and I, as an allegedly intelligent person, had to sit there for 10 minutes to work it out. And it's about people being able to have that confidence and to see the application of maths in everyday life, and we'll definitely be picking that up.
Okay, thank you. Mandy, on pages 20, 21, you got from A to J various areas where multiply can be applied. In fact, I think there's 10 areas there. It must be a week, 2 weeks since the agenda was written. Is there any you'd wish to add to that, or indeed take out? Are you comfortable with those areas you put down?
I think that's as it is at the moment. All of our consultations are backing that up at the moment.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Matthews has indicated on Teams that he'd wish to speak. Being a support councillor, I'm going to allow Councillor Matthews to come in, but Councillor Matthews, if you can hear me, could you make it a statement rather than a general question, please?
I can do, Nigel. Thank you. I was the director of the National Centre for Maths before I retired and went in some work. I'm very concerned in my statement that Lincoln Abbey Access might be focusing on business in urban areas, whereas in Mablethorpe and Sutton, a hugely deprived area, people are dropping out of education because they can't travel the 30 miles regularly and frequently to Grimsby, or the 30 miles regularly and frequently to Boston. So I hope that Mandy will consider the use of buses and take the service to the areas of need, because deprivation causes also problems with access and public transport as well. Plus, if you need any help with this, I'd be happy to sign up as a volunteer tutor. Thank you. Bye.
Okay.
It's a great idea, but please include the rural areas.
Okay, thank you, Councillor Matthews. Mandy, would you like to comment on that at all?
Just to accept that as a valid comment, and
Okay.
we will include that and address it.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Key.
Yeah, sorry, just something else that occurred to me. The big problem is reaching out to people who, for for one reason or another are difficult to find. Have you considered any online sort of videos? I was thinking, why I thought about this was we were talking on the radio this morning about Joe Wicks and the impact he had on Keep Fit in the mornings during COVID. And for people that perhaps are reluctant to publicly admit that they have an issue with numeracy or whatever, obviously to do something privately is equally as valuable if it's particularly to do with looking after their money and the things that Councillor Sneath mentioned about everyday living that they can do privately without having to join another group. Thank you.
Okay, thank you.
In terms of Multiply, there are 3 component parts. So one is going to be nationally delivery of an online digital platform for maths, and that's being delivered directly by the Department for Education. We are only one component part, that's the local element that we'll be delivering against, but anything we do will align to that online platform, so that will allow that opportunity for access.
Okay, thank you. Have we any? Oh, Councillor Mrs. Clark, sorry.
Thank you, Chair. It's just a thought, actually. As we're the lead authority for this, and it's a 3-year plan, and it's going to the executive shortly, will we be able to have sight of the 3-year plan once they've developed it, so that we've got it back and we've done the full circle, as it were, for this scrutiny panel?
I believe so, Mrs. Clark, but
Thank
Mandy,
you.
if you'd just like to confirm that.
That's absolutely not a problem.
Okay, thank you. Kiara, sorry, Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I would just like to follow on Councillor Sneath, what she said before about numeracy. I do remember when I was 5, you start counting already, and you count in your head. We used to do mental calculations. So every morning you will have like multiplication, timetables, pluses, minuses, and you deal with this on daily basis almost. I'm not a mathematician. I did literacy, which is I passed A levels in 9 subjects, but I did maths also. So we were not forced, but we were trained to do that. Now what I notice in the education system, the kids are so spoiled, they use their calculators. So they're not forced to do their maths in their head. And I'm going to tell you this, and this is from a teacher. They were teaching maths, and some of the kids, they say, I'm not bothered. I don't care. No, you need to know how to calculate. But they refuse to accept that they have to learn. And this is, I think, for me, is a major problem in education. Our pupils, they're not thinking about their future because they think the future comes in a pack and they can get away with it. So they don't want to learn numeracy or calculations in their head. I have a young lady, she works for me, and I tell you, it's very difficult for her to calculate. If a person, you ask him to pay you £4.50 and they're going to give you £20, they don't have it in their head, they will give £15.50. So, and I keep teaching her these tactics. Look at the money, think ahead, you know, you do half, you go from small to, but they don't want to learn. And I think that our education system is, I'm not going to say the main failure, but I think it's giving so much freedom to young generations, and therefore they don't want to learn any hard work. So numeracy is not just now, it will be an issue, in my opinion, it's going to be an issue in the future, and I think it's going to grow bigger and bigger. So I will really support you in what you are doing, and I hope you will be successful, really from my heart. I hope you will be successful. It is a sad situation, but if we go to the streets even now, university, my son is 19, and I tell you, he can, numeracy probably is good, but I don't think so he will calculate things in his head if you give him £20 or something. I doubt him. But thank you very much.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mandy. Like to come back on that at all?
I think the key objective of or one of the primary success factors of this will be to try and change that cultural understanding of maths, and to make sure that people understand it's so necessary in life. And one thing that I failed to mention to Councillor Clark's question was one concept we're thinking about is even through cookery, engaging people, market stalls we could go to, etc. And it's about maths in measuring out quantities, volume, etc. and engaging people. This is everyday life, and if people can pick this up, then it will apply to them, that cultural understanding of I can then get a better job, or I can access better jobs, I can progress within that workplace, and hopefully, sort of with a 3-year programme, we can really make a difference.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee, wish you to come back.
Yeah, just briefly, I just wanted to say, as a child, a very long time ago, I did my times tables as well, but I have to say, as a nurse, we use calculators all the time. We have to, for complex medication calculations, to make sure that they're right, and we do fluid input and output, and you use a calculator to ensure that it's right. So I do take the point, but I think there's of course, everyone needs a good basic understanding, but there is a place for both, and I wouldn't knock the way some things have moved on. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Mandy, you'd like to come back on that one?
Again, a point I noticed, and I think
Okay.
it's about having that hybrid approach.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
I'm really
It's not
sorry.
been an option
I was
here, yeah.
debating whether I should come back or not.
Yeah.
But I just want to tell you a tiny, tiny, rapid story. I failed my maths O-level as it was then. And when I wanted to resit, the teacher refused to let me resit because he wanted to cut down on failures. That's exactly what I was told. So I went away and took it myself, got it. That teacher's decision could have blocked my entire career, my degrees, and absolutely everything, all for the sake of one little exam. That's how important it is. But I think what you're doing is fantastic. Absolutely support you, and I wish you every success.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of the item. I move that we receive the report and that the committee endorses the report and supports the recommendations set out on page 17 and agree that our comments be passed to the Executive Councillor for their decision. Do I have a seconder, please? Councillor Key, thank you. We'll now vote on this item. All those in favour, please raise your hands. Thank you. Can't be anyone against. Can't be any abstentions. Okay, thank you. We'll now move on to item 6, which is the Citizens' Advice Annual Report. This item is on pages 27 to 50 of the agenda pack and provides us with an update on the performance of Citizens' Advice services across Lincolnshire during 2021-2022. We're also receiving a brief visual presentation as part of this item consideration. The report and presentation will be delivered by Monica Stark, Chair of Citizens' Advice Links, and Jenny Barnett, Chief Officer, Citizens' Advice Lindsay. The actions of this committee is that we're invited to consider and comment on the report and highlight any recommendations or further actions required. Before I go over to Monica and Jenny, I'm going to bring Councillor Woolley in here. She'd like to say a few words. Councillor Woolley.
Thank you, Chairman. Before we move on to invite Monica and Jenny to speak, I'd just like to make you aware that there's reference to the Household Income Support Fund, and so I've asked the officer leading on this for Lincolnshire County Council, Michelle Andrews, if she'll be in the background. So all the difficult questions around that, should they arise, Michelle, I'll defer to Michelle. And the other thing that I really, before I bring them in, the other thing that I really would like to applaud, particularly the South Lincolnshire group on CAB on, is on page 45, you will see that working in partnership, they have run a 6-month pilot project recognising that debt and money issues are as much a mental health issue as they are a physical, or can be a physical issue. And so they've been working very closely with a couple of the GPs in the south of the county. I very, very much hope that as we move forward into the integrated care system with our health colleagues as partners, that actually this piece of work is cascaded out to the whole of Lincolnshire, because often people are going to see their GP and it's because they have concerns around money issues. So on that note, I will now ask Monica and Jenny if they would like to speak.
Okay, Monica and Jenny, over to you.
Well, thank you. What a fantastic introduction. Thank you, Councillor Woolley. And also, I was so interested to hear about the maths work. And I think from our point of view, that's an incredibly relevant thing to be happening as well. And we would be very happy to be involved. I heard CAB mentioned, interestingly, that very interesting news, but certainly we would welcome all sort of activity therein. So we don't need to introduce ourselves. You've just very kindly introduced us, and we are here, as you know, to deliver our report about what's been happening in the last year. So in terms of a presentation, Chiara, I think you kindly said next slide, please. So we could already jump to slide 3. But while we're finding that one, just to explain, I'm both the chair of South Lincolnshire CA and also the liaison between the whole of CAL, which I'll explain in a minute, and the County Council. So CAL is Citizens Advice Lincolnshire, and it is a partnership of 4 different separately constituted CA charities. So there is Lindsay, there is Lincoln and District, there's Mid Lincolnshire, and there's South Lincolnshire. And it is a partnership known as CA, Citizens Advice Lincolnshire. And it's lovely because everyone still says CAB, CAB, and that's fine. We know we all love that expression, but it's actually officially Citizens Advice because we dropped the bureau several years ago. But it just shows how fond people are of us. Last year, we were very pleased to be able to announce that over 17,000 Lincolnshire clients were helped in some way by Citizens Advice. Now, that excludes any help via our national website. And it's quite amazing when you look at the numbers that actually access the national website. Over 40 million people each year access that website. And as you also know, we are delighted and very grateful to the £278,000 grant that you give us annually. We perform a sort of alchemy on that, and we turn that into £2,840,470 that comes into Lincolnshire to specifically help vulnerable clients. So how do we help? In the main, we have sort of 3 different ways: face-to-face, telephone, web chat, and email. So in terms of face-to-face, if you think back pre-pandemic, traditionally that's the way that people came through the door, probably on a high street, sat in a waiting room for a very long time and waited for an advisor. So almost all of the way that we worked was face-to-face. When the pandemic hit, that changed absolutely overnight. And I am absolutely still in awe of how all staff and volunteers just absolutely morphed from people facing clients in front of them to delivering a service from their back bedrooms or their kitchens, and so it went on. So face-to-face had to be dropped during the pandemic, as you can imagine, and telephone became the most important part of how clients accessed our work. That's probably going to stay in the long term, and if I were to predict, I would say that going forward, probably 80% plus will become the way that we access clients, or clients access our service. And we've also developed web chat and email, and particularly in South Lincolnshire, we've been doing an enormous amount of email, which seems to be very popular. However, having said all that, face-to-face remains incredibly important now that we are coming out of the pandemic. We certainly are seeing clients again through the door. And it's very important because people in this chamber have been talking about vulnerable clients, people who are hard to reach. And that's exactly why we need to keep those doors open. And we will always have a place for face-to-face clients. It's a very important part of the mix. And if I tell you that when we had a board meeting last week, one of our members of staff who was talking to us about what's happening in Spalding, apparently every day there is a queue of between 20 and 30 clients trying to get access in a face-to-face capacity. Next slide, please. So in terms of having said how important the telephone line is, our national telephone line is a platform called Advice Line, and it's, if you like, our gateway into our services. But it's not just our gateway, because people can get advice. If it's simple advice, they can get that on Advice Line. Now, you've all read the report, and as you know, our demand has almost tripled since October last year. And it will come as no surprise, the reasons for that is the loss of the £20 a week universal credit uplift, which was so important to our clients. We know about the cost of living crisis, the rise in the energy cap, that's about to go up again in the autumn. We know about the removal of the protective measures that have been put in place during the pandemic. All of that went. And then the access to the Household Support Fund, incredibly important support, and we were absolutely inundated, and that's one of the reasons why we could not meet demand. Next slide, please. So thinking about Advice Line, as I say, unprecedented levels of demand. And so we were unable to meet that demand for two reasons, obviously financial and personnel. It's not just about the money, it's also about the personnel, because we lost a lot of volunteers during the pandemic in terms of people wanting to be able to volunteer in a different style other than face-to-face. We are still struggling to bring them back. We're struggling to recruit personnel, and we're actually struggling to recruit staff. And I believe this isn't a CA problem. This is a problem, whatever industry you're in, people are really finding it hard to recruit. So of the 42,000 plus calls made by Lincolnshire residents to Advice Line last year, I'm afraid we were only able to answer on average 36%. And when you think about averages talking about maths, obviously that means that there were times when it was well below that. Obviously there were times when it was above. So we have been struggling. Now, I was asked by Lee Soderfield, well, what are you doing about this? And one of the things we are doing, but it can't be consistent across the four because we are four different charities, some of us are trying to dig into our reserves to try and recruit staff, because staff actually do answer more telephone calls than volunteers. And my colleague Jenny here actually has miraculously, through some very complicated maths that I haven't understood, been able to work out that in order to answer 80% of our calls, we would need around 15 full-time equivalents across Lincolnshire to meet that demand. Next slide, please. So what do we do? When people actually do access us, we help people with a range of problems. So these could be to do with housing, debt, benefits, employment, relationships, mental health, and certainly we have seen a dramatic rise in the amount of people presenting with mental health issues. And that really is a problem, A, in itself, but also if they are accessing our advice, often they cannot then use that advice because they are in such a bad place that they can't do anything with that advice. And one of the biggest things, which will come as no surprise to any of you, one of our biggest groups of people needing our support last year were people facing real poverty. We all talk now about that choice of heat or eat, and that's a reality. We are so often faced by clients, either on the phone or in person, talking about the fact that if they are a family, they are choosing when they will eat, if they will eat, the children must eat, so they are not sure if they can eat. It is a reality. And the number of issues per client has certainly risen this year. Last year, the average was 4.65. It's now 4.85. And that shows the complexity of the issues and the time required for each client to deal with those. Next slide, please. So the core service, another way of putting it, I suppose, is our generalist service. We have many different specialist services, which we'll talk about in a minute, but our generalist core service is the one that we receive a grant towards. And under that grant, we supported 6,867 people in this generalist advice. And with those clients, they have slightly fewer issues, 3.26 on average, to resolve. Next slide, please. So in terms of debt, getting back to the importance of numeracy, here we are, because this is a very specialist service provided through what's called the Money Advice Pension Service. And in order to be a debt advisor through this service, you have to undergo an immense amount of training. So it's a very, very specialist service. Within that service, we supported 2,698 clients. And again, here we are again looking at that demand. It practically doubled from Q1 last year. So this is again due to those same issues that we just looked at before, and the spike because of the Household Support Fund. So I'm going to hand over to my colleague Jenny now to present the next part of the presentation. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay.
Next slide, please. So Monica talked about the specialist services that we provide, and one of which was the Money Advice and Pension Service, which supports people with debt.
Jenny, you've got a microphone on, but could you get a bit closer to it, please?
Sorry, is that better?
Okay.
Sorry.
Thank you.
Oh,
And Monica turn hers off. That's it?
Sorry.
Okay. All
So
sorted.
Monica spoke about the debt service that we provide, and much of which is funded through the Money Advice and Pension Service. But what we do in our areas and county-wide, we carry out a needs analysis and look at the gaps in provision to support our clients, and then we seek funding to address that. So, for example, one of those areas would be around welfare benefits. That constitutes quite a large proportion of the statistics that we see coming through and our client issues. Across Lincolnshire, we help people with specific welfare benefits. Much of it is around disability benefits, actually, because many of our clients, at least 50%, our data shows, of our clients are disabled or have long-term health issues. But what we're seeing at the moment as well is one of the highest volumes is around universal credit. People come to us, for example, because they've got issues around universal credit. That might be because their payment is late, they're receiving the incorrect amount, they want to challenge a decision, they're worse off on universal credit, and that is going to get busier because, as we are aware, that the government will be transitioning everybody from tax credits to universal credits by 2024. So we expect that to remain high in volumes. But as you can see, employment support allowance is high second there, and that's supporting those people who need specific support around that. But we deliver around housing support as well. We've got projects, specialist projects that support people with homelessness prevention, remaining in their homes, etc. But as I say, across the whole of Lincolnshire, we deliver a range of different specialist services, and that's carried out via a needs analysis so that we can address the gaps in provision. If we could move to the next slide, please. Again, we can see the top issues. So when a client comes to us, we record quite a significant amount on our database. And a client might come to us with one particular issue, but they have quite a range of issues. So somebody who is coming to us because they're in debt, they may also need support with universal credit to maximise their income. They might need help with a particular benefit to maximise their income. If they're homeless, you know, they're coming to us with a homelessness issue, but actually that could be because they are in debt that they're homeless. So people don't just come to us for one issue. There's a multitude of issues that come out of seeing a client. But we can see some of the top issues here at the moment are constantly around universal credit, working tax credits, and personal independent payments. We don't work alone. We work in partnership across the county and locally in our districts. We can't achieve everything on our own. Some of our partnerships include our food banks locally, as you can see. We're a member of the Financial Inclusion Partnership. We work very closely with our district councils, and as previously mentioned, that was of late helping to distribute the Household Support Fund to people who are very much in need of that. And as already mentioned, we're hoping to work with the NHS and provide advice in health settings. But that's just an example. We work much broader than that. We work along trading standards who are here today. We work with a range of partners across our district and across the counties to support vulnerable clients. Our value to society. We want to show and evidence the impact
that we make for our clients. When we help people solve their problems, we create a financial value. So this means that we save the government and society money by stopping problems that cost money. It's impossible to put a value on everything we do, but where we have the evidence, we want to evidence the impact and tell that story. So you can see there's quite an impact here, and it tells quite a story, the savings that we are making. So the fiscal value, for example, would be around the financial savings to local and national government due to fewer payments for out-of-work benefits, costly evictions, rehousing evicted tenants, and less demand on the NHS. The public value, for example, would be when people have fewer problems, they have higher levels of well-being, participation in society and productivity improves, and our calculation of public value also includes the value of the volunteer services that we incorporate into our delivery. The value to the people we help individual clients to achieve individual financial outcomes, like getting backdated benefits, writing off debt, and refunds for consumer issues. So again, this doesn't include all of the value that we provide for our clients. If we could move on to the next slide, please. Yes, it's impossible to put a financial value on everything we do. As you've just seen, that is an approved treasury model that we use. But we also have a robust management information system, again, that we collect evidence of almost everything that we do that is relevant. So we would calculate how much we have helped people with debt issues, how much debt we've dealt with for our clients in a specific period of time, the disability benefits that we might have secured for clients, but also we would record those smaller outcomes that are really vitally important to people, like the white goods that we might have helped them secure, a new washing machine, because, for example, if somebody's washing machine breaks and they have no money, you know, it can put them completely out of kilter, and those things are vitally important to people. £50 to one person is equally as important as 500 to another. So we help and a multitude of areas, and we aim to record the impact of what we do. So what you see here is probably touching on the stats that we have available to us, but we aim to record everything we do and use that in the most useful ways. So some of that we would use as evidence when we're bidding for funding, for example, for our projects, and that evidence helps us. If we could just move forward, thank you. So through that model, we're able to evidence the savings to Lincolnshire County Council in that narrow sort of field of that model, and that was by reducing homelessness, maximising the income for those people we help, which prevents more costly interventions. But again, it's only a fraction. We help the local authority with council tax arrears, for example. We reschedule them and help support people around that area, and we reduce the associated administrative costs. But we can evidence quite a large value through helping the clients in Lincolnshire as well. If we could move forward. As a service, one of our key aims is our research and campaigns work. It's our twin aim, actually, of our organisation. Together as a whole network across the country, we work together. And we work locally as well when we identify issues to lobby on behalf of our clients so that we can support them and lobby for improvements that will make a difference to their lives. So this just gives an example, for instance. Nationally, actually, Citizens Advice lobbied quite hard actually around the universal credit and the reduction of the £20 uplift. But here's some other examples there where we've helped people and lobbied against scams. Pension credit, for example, we know that there's not enough people claiming pension credit, issues with access to legal advice. We are lobbying against energy and energy savings, domestic abuse. We know that domestic abuse issues went up during the pandemic, and that became quite a large issue. And we help people, for example, with their housing issues and lobby against that, rogue landlords, rents and legalities around people's housing issues. And that's just an example of the issues around which we carry out campaigns. But we work, again, nationally and locally around that campaigning. This is an example of a case study of a client that was actually helped in South Links, in fact. As you've obviously read this, it was really important that the client actually did prove their status, and this is important for accommodation, etc. But we help many of vulnerable clients in Lincolnshire, and we're always working on our systems and processes and what we do to help vulnerable clients. So, for example, you know, we use Language Line, we support those who are hard of hearing. This year in particular, two districts actually, we worked with our local authorities and 50 partners to support vulnerable clients access our services as a way into our service. So again, that's just an example of a vulnerable client that we have helped. If we could go to the next slide, please. And this is what our clients are saying. We get regular feedback from our clients. We have a survey that goes out at least once a quarter to our clients and asks for feedback. As you will see in our report, there's some feedback that we've asked from our clients on how they found access to our services, how we've helped them find a way forward. And we really do help the most vulnerable in society. And these are genuine quotes that we have received from our clients, as you can see. We're actually helping them save their life, and it's a really critical lifeline and support for the most vulnerable people in society.
Okay. Thank you. Ciara, anyone wishing to comment? Any members wish to comment? Councillor Lee, followed by Councillor Gray.
Thanks, Chair. I just wanted to make a few comments. First of all, can we have a copy of the presentation? We do usually get those, don't we? Yeah. Just to say thank you so much for all the work that you do. Any comment I make is not aimed at denigrating anything that you do in any way. I think you do an absolutely cracking job, and I think a lot of people would really, really struggle without you. Just looked at a few points, really. First of all, at the bottom of page 44, it says something about the DWP moving to a telephone service. Could you tell us a little bit more about that? Just wanted to make the point that you say you offer some kind of legal service. I think that's really important because it's really hard to get legal aid these days for a lot of things, isn't it? And finally, looking at the figures that you've given us, Lincolnshire County Council give £278,000 in a grant, but you say that the savings that you create are £729,338. I'd like to ask, and I'm not holding my breath here, I remember the full council meeting about helping people who were suffering from the full cost of living crisis and being told that there was nothing to see here. Actually, there is, and events afterwards have proved that. But I'd like to ask some of my colleagues on this committee to join me in recommending that Lincolnshire County Council actually increase, no numbers, but increase the amount that we give to the Citizens Advice Bureau, because what we give is perhaps what it looks to me like about a third of what we save you. So I think there's a good argument to be made for doing that. And if it were to come from this committee, I think it would be at least a start, and perhaps other people could help you with more money. Money isn't the answer to everything, but you've clearly said that the issue is resourcing and funding. So actually it would help you. And I hope that some of my fellow members on this committee, and as I say, I'm not holding my breath, join me in recommending that to the executive. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I'm just going to bring Councillor Woolley in at this stage.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, if I can reassure Councillor Lee that, and literally as we speak, we are reassessing all the time the contract that we have with CAL, apologies Monica, old habits die hard, because the one thing that we really want to be sure of is that the organisation has as much flexibility as possible. If we get too prescriptive, they can't move quickly enough to be able to change focus. And I think the Household Support Fund was a good illustration of that, of how quickly it came in. If we'd have sort of channeled them into saying you can only spend your money in certain areas, that could have made a difficult situation even worse. So Never say never, but it is a case that, yes, that pot has to be spread as thinly as possible, but sweated as much as possible. And there are other areas that the district councils, for example, they are open to putting funding in, and indeed certainly in the south of the county they do, don't they, Monica? So it's working more as a team and making sure that we all club together in that area of work to make sure that any penny that is, or any pound that's coming into Lincolnshire is used appropriately and not sent out twice.
If I could just come back, my proposal was that we increase the amount. We're not prescriptive about where it goes, but we just basically give you a bit more money. And I'm a county councillor. I can't say what the city council or anybody else does, but what I can do is ask my colleagues on the county council to support people by increasing this funding from the county council. Thank you.
Councillor Woolley, would you like to come back on that one? Councillor Woolley, would you like to come back on that?
That, if I may, it sounds like buck passing, Chairman, but this is the committee. It is a decision that the committee needs to discuss. But you know, and there are other places that can
sure.
put funding in. Thank you.
So we're here today to scrutinise what we have in front of us, and that's for another time, I believe. Yeah, I've got a number of speakers. I've got Councillor Gray, Councillor Mrs. Clark, and you just pointed out someone else. Councillor Brockway. So in that order, please. Councillor Gray.
Mr. Chairman, thanks very much. I just want to congratulate firstly Citizens Advice Lincolnshire on the tremendous support you are offering. As Councillor Woolley says, it is very much a partnership approach. And I know in East Lindsey we have worked very closely with Citizens Advice Lindsey to deliver and fund a financial first aid recovery programme. But I just wondered, how are you working with the social housing providers? So, for instance, I know in East Lindsey, Platform Housing Group own over 6,000 homes. That's a lot of homes. I'm aware that during COVID, they created £1 million wellbeing pot to help their residents. But I just wondered how you are working with social housing providers like Platform Housing Group, because they are a great partner. They bring in a huge amount of revenue. They build a lot of homes in our county. So I just wondered how you were working with them, or social housing developers like them.
If I can just give an example, actually, we were previously funded a small amount by Platform Housing. They weren't actually called that. I don't think recently merged, haven't they? But
it was probably Waterloo. They were Waterloo
that's
Housing
right.
Group. Yeah.
But that funding did cease because they also provide sort of support for their tenants. Nevertheless, they're a key partner to us, and we work very closely with them. We work very closely with other housing providers across the county. In East Lindsey, we work very closely with the housing team. In fact, we are funded for homelessness prevention by the housing team. And yes, thank you very much, because also East Lindsey is funded for financial first aid, that COVID recovery programme, and that's very much appreciated, and we're getting support out to clients. But we do work with all partners, and part of that partnership approach we gave presentations to 50 partners across East and West Lindsey, in fact, over the last year, and that would have included our social housing providers as how their clients can access our services and how they can support those clients to access our services. So we are always working together, but we're not directly funded by them, for example. But we've got a very keen eye on what's happening with homelessness prevention, what's happening with social housing providers, and work very closely with them.
Thank you for that.
Okay, thank you. Monica, would you like to come back on that one?
Yes, I want to sort of thank everybody who wanted to be very supportive of CA. That's really appreciative. I just wanted to clarify something, which is that this is a grant. So at the moment, it is not a contract. And I think the point that Councillor Woolley makes is a very important one, because having a grant and not a contract does give us the flexibility to try and support where we need to do that. And I think the fact that we have struggled with demand has sort of shown that if that were a contract, we wouldn't be meeting our KPIs and we'd be in a lot of trouble. So a grant is very important. And I don't want to mention numbers either, but as you mentioned this, it did strike me that it is perhaps a relevant thing to say that actually in 2014-15, the County Council were kind enough to be funding us to the tune of just literally about £450 short of £400,000. So we have had a tripling of demand and obviously our finances, not just via the County Council, but in other areas, have diminished. So this is a bit like, you know, people say nowadays a double whammy, I suppose, and this is what we're struggling with. So yes, we would appreciate any help.
Thank you. I'm sure you've bent all areas, Monica, and I'm sure we've all got sympathy for you. Councillor Lee?
I might have missed it, but I asked about the work at the DWP move to a telephone service, just because I don't know.
So, yeah, no, this is a very specific service. So this is the Universal Credit Helpline, which is known as the Help to Claim telephone line. So the support that people have been able to access when they are first referred to Universal Credit has been a helpline, and now, although you could have also face-to-face help, they are now moving to a system where anybody who is going to go onto Universal Credit has to phone a phone line. And we've been arguing like mad, as you can imagine, that actually that's not going to help the most vulnerable. But as it stands, and Jenny's at the coalface will know a lot more than I do, but it's basically, it's those people who need to access the Universal Credit are going to have to go and do it through a telephone line.
Can I just ask, what if they can't afford a phone? Is there a facility to go into DWP and use one there?
Jenny, your microphone again,
Apologies. The telephone lines that we operate are free phone numbers. So that's from our advice line through to our consumer service, through to the Universal Credit. We advertise all of our free phone telephone numbers so that clients are able to get through to them.
As long as they've got a phone?
As long as they've got a telephone, of course. Absolutely.
Okay.
But actually, if I could just mention, if you think about areas like East Lindsey and West Lindsey that are really vast and rural, people, you know, sometimes that telephone is a lifeline to them, because equally so they've got to try and find the bus fare to get in and navigate those buses to get in at certain times. So, you know, it's not one size fits all really. Clients access services in different ways depending on their vulnerability and their needs and the finances, etc.
Yeah, I agree, but that's why the hybrid's good, face-to-face and phone.
Okay, could I bring in Mrs. Clark, please? Councillor Mrs. Clark.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, ladies, for that report. I really want to commend you on the work that is carried out by your organisation. Just briefly, as a small, very short backstory, I also used to work in welfare benefits, and you were very much a support to all the work that was done while I was working in welfare benefits in a local city council. It's vital. You are a vital, vital service, because where people cannot be assisted, where they would land first at their district council for council tax support, housing support, homelessness support, legal support, we were able to fast track if we thought we'd got somebody there in front of us immediately to you, you know, to safeguard them. And also the face-to-face. I can't tell you how important the face-to-face, talking to somebody, whether it be at a local authority or yourselves, is absolutely a relief, because you are able to help a person just by talking to them and gaining their confidence and getting them on the right track to where they need to be, and not be afraid to talk about the problems they're facing. However hard they will be, there are people like that who are going to do it. And I have to say, the knowledge that they have to have is a superior, if it's equal to any benefits officers that take months and months to train. They have to have it, and they have to be absolutely right. So I can't tell you how vital and how worthwhile and how needed your service really is, and we must always, always protect it. That aside, I just need to ask a question. I needed to say that because I know how important you are. I needed to ask, on page 36, it says at 1.12, it would be interesting to talk to the LCC about possible interventions to support council tenants. I'm not sure, I couldn't work out whether that was a quote from somewhere or what exactly that meant, and I was just wanted to ask you to expand on that, because that's an interesting point. Usually that's dealt with by district councils. So if there's something there that we need to expand on in order to support the oncoming onslaught of poverty and difficulties that we are now seeing hitting all of our communities, what else? Where does that fit in? What does that mean, please? Thank you.
That's me being very naughty. I actually just put that in myself because I feel it very strongly. Now, I had no mandate to do that, but I think it's because when we look at some of the issues that are being faced, and Jenny mentioned this before, when we look at housing benefit and things like that, I just feel strongly that if we could have some kind of, and it may already exist, some kind of consortium of housing providers from the local districts that get together regularly maybe under an LCC banner that looks at it, because I just feel that we could be moving towards preventative services. I have no remit at all for this, but I just feel being sort of newly in my liaison role, I just think, why do we see the same issues coming up time and time again? Could we not be working in a far more preventative way? And the councillor over there mentioned the platform housing services, and I'm sure that there are housing associations, district councils under an umbrella of LCC that could regularly get together so that we can support tenancies before people actually get the tenancies, post-tenancy, because that's when tenancies fall down because people can't afford, they don't know how to budget, they don't, all this stuff. If we could do some kind of amazing thing that says, wow, Lincolnshire can do this, we can have wraparound services, it'd be just great to be able to sort of co-design things, I think. And as I say, I'm only speaking as a newly installed person to do that sort of kind of liaison, because I just think we are going round and round and round. All those times of seeing PIP is always at the top, housing benefits, something. These are things I think we could be addressing if we could sit down as Citizens Advice Lincolnshire and co-design with district councils under an umbrella that says housing prevention or whatever. That's really why that's in there.
If I could just add as well as an example, and it was around council tax arrears. In fact, we worked with East Lindsey District Council, and they came in to support our advisors and showed them the whole systems and processes and how people can apply online for help with council tax support. Because as an example, I think people automatically think when they apply for universal credit that they're eligible for council tax support, and they're actually not, and they have to apply separately. So we worked as a partnership on that, and they came in, we worked as a team to support people around that, and in fact we still collect stats around that, the number of clients that we're supporting together with East Lindsey around council tax, so that clients, it's a preventative measure so that we can ensure that clients and residents don't get in arrears with council tax, and they know the right route to follow. So that's just an example of working together in partnership.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Wally, then Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. Monica, you illustrated beautifully the problem of a two-tier council system, in that it's not, we don't work in a hierarchy, and it is actually, we've got separate statutory functions, and the concerns you have and the frustrations you have really do firmly sit with the district councils. I'd be more than happy to introduce you, certainly in the south of the area where we both cover both South Kesteven and South Holland, who I'm quite sure would be quite prepared to take the lead if necessary, or indeed have that conversation and draw colleagues together from the district councils to progress your concerns. But county council don't do housing.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Thank you, Chairman. Yes, thank you very much for this report, and also thank you very much for your work. It's so wide-ranging, I can't imagine the breadth of expertise that you need to call on. It's incredible, actually. There are two things that I've got concerns about this during the discussion this morning. Forgive me if this has been mentioned, my hearing aids went down at one point. In 1.26, it talks about they included advocating for clients who were affected by the removal of the £20 a week universal credit uplift. That is slightly misleading. It was a time-limited grant, which was fulfilled until the end of the grant period. And I think it is important, it's slightly political. That's a slightly political statement. And I would suggest that better wording might be when the £20 a week universal credit grant came to an end. Because that's the truth. That's actually what happened. It wasn't that it was removed, you know, we're taking your money away. It was a time-limited grant. Okay, so it's important for that sort of accuracy. The other thing is picking up on Councillor Lee's comments about giving more money. I think everybody would like to give more money, not just to this, but to other organisations. I think I've got things in children's services I would certainly be advocating for. But I would have to ask you why you didn't raise this before the budget was done, and where exactly you think the money is going to come from to add here. Are you going to take it from children's? Or are you going to take it from the roads? Where are you going to take it from? It's very easy to sit in a committee and say, I want to give you more money. We'd all like to give them more money, okay? But without a business case, without thinking it through, you can't make such a proposal. It's an empty proposal. Or if you make it, you know very well that it's impossible to support, and then it just becomes a political game. So I'm a bit cross about that, frankly, because if you're going to come to a scrutiny committee, you're right, we scrutinise what's in front of us. This isn't the place for proposals. In that way, this should have gone into the budget discussion, which you were a part of. So what you're doing again is conveying a wrong impression. It's which can be taken to mean something that it isn't. So I'm sorry, I think it's a hollow proposal. It's the wrong place, not backed by any information whatsoever, and so is unsupportable. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Lee.
Yeah, I'd just come back. This council sits on a huge pot of resources. I would suggest that we might be able to dip into that. The business case I would make, just very basically off the top of my head, is the fact that we put 278,000 in and we save. That makes a saving of 729,000. So I think there's an answer there. And actually, I'm more than a little bit cross to see the way people are suffering because of the cost of living crisis. And I'm a politician and I will make political points and I won't apologise for that.
Okay, thank you both for your contributions. I'll say they have bent our ears, I feel. We do have sympathy for you, and that is for another day. I'm sorry. But Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I won't contribute to the debate. I'll leave it there. However, what I would like to talk about is, first of all, I would like to thank you. And I do work very closely with the Citizen Advice Bureau in Boston, and I know they do a great job. It's immense. It's great to hear that, and I really salute your work. The only concern of mine is the 36% of deliveries. It's very low, and I think things will probably increase in the near future because, as we heard from yesterday on the news, that the price of pasta has went up. So there is no more pasta asciutta, there is no more pasta no bolognese, I think, or lasagna. So it is, I mean, sad to see these prices going up. As I said, I think it will be difficult for you in the future. My question is, just because you need volunteers and you need paid workers, can you tell me how many vacancies have you got, for example, in Boston? Do you have any idea, or just in general? Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Jenny?
I can't say at the moment how many vacancies there are in Boston, but as an example, currently in the Lindsay areas, we have around about 10 volunteers, frontline volunteers, delivering advice, and the same amount in Lincoln, Citizens Advice. I'm not sure about in the south, but actually we would have at one time had 20 to 30 volunteers or more delivering advice, and that number reduced dramatically during the pandemic. A lot of our volunteers decided not to return for a variety of reasons. A lot of volunteers are of an older generation because they've finished work and they want to contribute back to society. And I think many of those older volunteers were a bit worried about the pandemic. But I'd like to stress that people think volunteering costs nothing and it's free. To support a volunteer is expensive, it costs money, because all of our staff, as you alluded to, have to are well trained. They have to reach a certain competency in order to deliver advice, and that they have to reach that competency to be signed off on our insurance to deliver that advice, because it's all legal advice. So all of our volunteers go through extensive training and are supported. So whether it's a paid member of staff or a volunteer, they both cost money to support. Having said that, you can actually deliver more with a paid member of staff, and that's not because we don't value volunteers, because we'll target our paid staff, we'll hold them to account, they'll have KPIs to meet. And that becomes slightly more difficult when people are volunteering. Nevertheless, you know, we still expect our volunteers to meet high standards. So that's just an example of the difference with paid staff and volunteers, both equally valued, both cost money, irrespective of whether they're paid or not. But there are a number of vacancies at the moment across the county. I think we're probably all aware of the employment situation nationally anyway. There's less jobs than people looking for work, and that has created vacancies where we are at the moment. Even if I think about the Lindsay services, we've got half a dozen vacancies out at the moment to deliver services, and that's creating a problem as well, because we're finding it difficult to recruit. We don't offer the highest salaries. We're trying to be as competitive as we can and to be an attractive employer on what we've got, because we have to attract people that can deliver to quality standards. But again, you know, it's all very challenging. And I'm not suggesting that other organisations don't have their challenges. Clearly they do. But yeah, there are vacancies across county-wide. In fact, we spoke the other day, actually, didn't we, about collecting that data and the vacancies county-wide, because we do work together. But if that just gives you a response to your question, I can't give you the exact number at the moment.
That's fine. May I come back, Mr. Chairman, if I may? Can you tell me how much money, because we get a lot of figures here, how much money do you spend on translations?
Well, I haven't got the figure on me, but I can get that to you, because actually Language Line costs money, and we record the use of Language Line against each of our projects. So we do have that figure, because obviously when we pay the bill, we code that to our various projects, the cost of that. So I could get that figure to you. Yes.
Okay, thank you, Monica.
And we do have an EUSS project, so both a migrant worker project and also a resettlement scheme through the Home Office. And for that, we do employ somebody who is a Polish speaker, so we have a Polish line, and that is what you would speak if you go onto the Polish line. Yes.
Okay, thank you.
And just to add to your question, Jenny talked about 20 volunteers previously. We had 120 volunteers in South Lincolnshire. We're now down to around 30.
Okay, thank you, Monica. Councillor Key.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, I would like to praise you for all that you do. A member of my family was a volunteer, and someone else that I know very well benefited greatly from advice they received from you. So it is a wonderful service that you give. I am concerned about the lack of volunteers, as you've said, and I'd really just like to ask you what you can do about it, because as you said, everybody is in this boat, but there is a vast untapped reserve of people who I know would be perfectly, adequate and good enough to do this work, but it's just sort of promoting the value of it, because it is a wonderful, rewarding job. The member of my family who did it made a real difference to people's lives in an inner city, and she was absolutely thrilled with what she managed to achieve. And it's just getting that message over that it's a two-way thing. It's not just you giving, you receive a lot as a volunteer as well. And as regards the money situation, it's factual reports like this which I'm sure will maximise how much money this council is able to give you when the next budget comes round, because these sort of detailed reports do help very much, I'm sure, in the decision making. So it's just, how do you get this message to the volunteers? Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, it's an absolute problem for whole of the charity sector. It's not just citizens' advice, as you know. As Jenny said, during a lockdown, certainly our volunteers who are of an older profile thought this is not for them. They came into it to do face-to-face and being asked to do things that were very much computer-based, recording all the things on computer, really they felt it wasn't for them. So one of the things that we are doing across Lincolnshire is looking and targeting the idea of getting into schools and colleges to promote the idea to younger people. They can come in and volunteer. It does take 6 to 8 weeks to train somebody to volunteer on a helpline. But that is certainly one of the big ways that we're thinking of going. But also the other side of it, at the other end, is getting into pre-retirement clubs that I hope still do exist. I mean, there were a lot of those sorts of things pre-pandemic. A lot of things have changed. So it is very much about promoting at both ends, people who've got time, but people who are coming through. We also work with the University of Lincoln. We're hoping to actually appoint various graduates. We're really promoting CA across the county to the graduates. And that we hope might be a way through, either through volunteers or for paid staff. But also one of the things that we do a lot of, I think, is promoting the roles through social media. So that again is targeting possibly the younger profile. So Jenny will correct me if I've forgotten any way that we really go at it.
No, I would agree with what you said. And if I could just point out that 6 to 8 weeks is just the basic training for the lower level advice, you know, or that lower level gateway, because the training is really extensive and it's ongoing. And it's a continual professional development of training for volunteers equally as it is paid staff. I agree with you about the university. Lincoln Citizens Advice have got a cohort of university students in training as we speak. We've got a partnership with the university. But just given the news of late, you may have read, which I'm sure you have, that the government is aiming to encourage those people who are retired back into the workforce because there's a shortage of workers. So that actually may well sort of exacerbate our plans really for recruiting volunteers as well, but we're always looking at different avenues and different ways to recruit volunteers. But we need volunteers who can dedicate consistently. So we would expect a volunteer to come and volunteer for us at a minimum of a day a week, if not 2, to be able to provide those professional skills. And if you think about the pandemic, the sort of welfare benefits, etc., was changing day by day. So people have got to be in the service regularly giving advice to update those skills. So it's not sort of, it's a different type of volunteering. It can't just be once a month or as and when. It has to be consistent, as you would know if you had a family member doing that. You know, so you've got to find the right people who are suited to the role and have got the sort of skills that can take on that complex work. Yeah, we try in a variety of ways.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Mrs. Clark.
Thank you, Chair, for indulging me. I just want to come back actually on the work that you do. It's very difficult work and often, more often than not, very distressing. And your well-being has not been mentioned in the work that you carry out. When I was doing it in a previous life, we had a very deep basement with an old set of drawers that we could go and kick when we used to get frustrated and distressed, because you need to get rid of that and you can't display that in front of your clients. So that time will have moved on now and we don't do that anymore, but I was just wanted to know about your well-being and how that is managed and how you manage yourselves, because that hasn't been discussed. Thank you.
Yeah, if I could just point out, the Money Advice and Pension Service are in the process of recommissioning the debt advice, and one of the key sort of criteria in that is the well-being of debt advisors. They need to know how you're going to build that into the service, because they actually do recognise the impact on the well-being of advisors when they're dealing with not just complex issues, but clients, for example, who we've had a client walk in with a carrier bag and refuse to sit. This was when we delivered the face-to-face, and we still do now, but less at the moment, and refuse to move, otherwise they'd commit suicide if they didn't get help. That's the kind of support that we're giving. So I agree with you, it's really, really important that we we take time out to respect people's well-being and the well-being of the advisors, volunteers and paid staff who are delivering that service. So it is quite high on our agenda. So, for example, we sign up to an organisation called LifeWorks, and all of our employees have access to that. In the Lindsay service, we have 6 mental health trained first aiders to support staff and volunteers. So we take it quite seriously, the support that we can offer our staff and volunteers around their well-being. It's really important, so thank you for pointing that out.
Thank you. I can see no further speakers. So thank you for your questions and comments. This now concludes the discussion of this item. I'm going to move that we endorse the report and request that our comments from the debate are taken under consideration. Can members please raise your hand if you agree? Okay, I think that's everyone. Thank you. I think before we go to the next agenda item, I'd just like to offer a belated welcome to Glenn Garrard. For those who don't know, Glenn is the Executive Director for Adult Care and Communities Wellbeing to this meeting. And also to Martin Parker, who is the Assistant Director of Public Protection. You may recall we've seen Martin on Teams before, but I think this is the first time in the Chamber, so very warm welcome to you, Martin. Thank you. Next item on the agenda is agenda item 7, which is the Public Protection Community Scrutiny Committee Work Programme. This item is on pages 51 to 56 of the agenda pack. The report will be presented by Chiara. The actions of this committee is that we're invited to review the work programme and highlight any additional scrutiny activity which could be included for consideration in the work programme. So over to you, Chiara.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. So what you have in front of you today is the work programme as that was captured up until the date that we dispatched the agenda for this committee meeting. Since then, we've had a couple of additions. On July's agenda, we will receive the service level performance reporting against performance framework for 2021-2022 quarter 4, and we will also receive the integrated risk management plan for 2020 to 2024 from the Chief Fire Officer. In addition to this, we will receive the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Service proposed changes of duty arrangements. We will also receive the annual report on performance of Fire and Rescue Service attendance at flooding incidents, and we will also receive the library's Year 6 update, progress and development, which will include the Ermine Library Hub. While sitting as the Crime and Disorder Committee, we will also receive a pre-decision item, the recommissioning of domestic abuse services, which is for future executive decision on the 6th of September 2022. In addition to this, and in relation to what I already mentioned as the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Service proposed changes to duty arrangements report that we will receive from the Chief Fire Officer, we will also anticipate a further update report emerging from that, which will come into our meeting in September 2022. And I would also like to make a note that the item around modern day slavery has been removed from the agenda for September 2022. The title was previously Serious and Organized Crime, Fraud and Modern Day Slavery, as this will be streamlined in the reporting system of Safer Communities. Thank you very much indeed, and this concludes my update to you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Chiara. Any questions? Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just something which is probably I would like if we can bring it here and discuss it. Listening to the news, I mean, lately, most of members of the public, they lost faith and trust in the police, and we know what's going on regarding the police, and they're dealing with certain issues. So I would like probably to see if we can talk to our police commissioner, probably Mark, if he can come here and answer some questions. That will be very interesting, because we would like to restore the trust in the police again. And unfortunately, most of the members of the public I will talk about Boston, people have lost trust in them. And I think it's not good, because that's our safety, that's the safety of communities. If the uniform cannot provide you that, I don't know where we are going. But thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yeah, thank you too. Is that in our remit to do that, do you feel?
Thank you very much. As with all suggestions made and captured at each meeting, we will go back to responsible officers and consult with them whether this is something that can be addressed through this forum. Thank you.
So we'll certainly look into that, Councillor Danny, and if indeed this is the appropriate committee, it'll come back here. Thank you.
Councillor Lee?
Councillor Lee.
Just wanted to say thank you for including Ermine Library in the July one. Really pleased to see it, and thank you to Councillor Boutroyd for the help that he's given. It's taken us a long time to get there, but I think we're nearly there.
We try not to let anything slip, and we all get there in the end, so thank you for that. Councillor Boutroyd.
Thank you, Councillor Lee. I just wanted to come in on the point about having the Police and Crime Commissioner here. We do have representation on the Police and Crime panel. I sit on there myself, so if you had any concerns or you wanted to address them through the panel, I'd be happy to raise any queries for you. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So thank you for your questions and comments. That now concludes the discussion of this item, and in doing so I'll move that we note the report and approve the existing work programme as detailed in pages 51 to 56 and the additional items highlighted in the discussion from Chiara. That was the Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Service proposed changes of duty arrangements July 2022, Lincolnshire Fire and Rescue Service proposed changes of duty arrangements follow-up report September 2022, and also remove of serious unorganised crime, fraud and modern day slavery from September 2022. Can I ask you to raise your hand if you agree? Okay, thank you, that's all agreed, thank you. We'll now close as this part of the meeting and open up as the Crime and Disorder Committee. This is agenda item number 8. So we sit as the Crime and Disorder Scrutiny Committee, and we'll be discharging our duties under the Section 19 of the Police and Criminal Justice Act 2006. So item 8 is about a review of work to tackle fraud, including its impact on vulnerable individuals during the pandemic. This item is on pages 57 to 62 of the agenda pack, and it provides an update on the work taking place within Lincolnshire County Council to reduce the impact of fraud, as a host and contributing partner to the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership Crime and Disorder Priority Group. I think there's some mention of a visual presentation. Chiara, is that still going ahead? Indeed, we've got time for that. So yeah, I'll pass you over now to Vicky Salmon, the Community Safety Strategy Coordinator.
Thank you, Chairman. If you're ready to start the slides, please, Chiara. Thank you. Okay, thanks. So I'm Vicky Salmon and I work for the Safer Community Service, but part of my role is to coordinate the Crime and Disorder Fraud Core Priority Group within the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership. For the next slide, please. Thanks. So I think most importantly, we need to set the scene and understand the prevalence of fraud, and we can see quite clearly that it's increasing. Action Fraud have reported there has been a 27% rise in fraud offences, and that's just been in the last year. So things are really increasing, and our colleagues in the Office of National Statistics have let us know that fraud estimates do not follow the trend of falling victimisation that have been seen in other areas of crime over the lockdown period. So it's something that is really front and centre for the agenda. Next slide, please. Fraud is a priority for Lincolnshire County Council and the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership. Presently, fraud prevention work is very well developed, and if we reflect on the corporate plan, we can see that the activities highlighted in the report are showing the steps that are being taken to enable everyone to live their life to the full. Moreover, a strategic review was carried out by the Safer Lincolnshire Partnership at the end of last year, and it has been highlighted moving forward that we need to focus on digitally enabled fraud and ID theft. And this is to ensure that residents are informed and better able to protect themselves and not become a repeat victim of fraud. Thanks, Kia. So I think really, really importantly here is that anyone can be a victim of fraud. I can be a victim of fraud, you can be a victim of fraud, our friends, neighbours and family, but our vulnerable residents are those that are most at risk. And the factors that we're looking at with regard to vulnerability can include age, where the person lives, whether they have digital skills or not, and their social connections, or probably more importantly, their lack of social connections. Fraud has been shown to have a significant impact on vulnerable victims, and most obviously a financial impact, but moreover, evidence is showing us that the impact on their health and well-being is quite significant. At this point, it's important for us to recognise other responsibilities of the County Council under the Care Act, and a duty is placed on us to protect adults from financial abuse, and being a victim of fraud and scams would certainly meet with that criteria. We know that fraud is increasing, and as well as fraudsters taking advantage of the lockdown, we can also say that advances in technology are transforming fraud in scale and form. Some examples that I can give you would be romance fraud is perpetrated on social media or through dating apps. Investment fraud is committed through fake websites, and actually more importantly, cloned websites. And rogue traders are now taking advantage of not being able to knock on people's doors as much, and they are now lurking on online marketplaces and on recommendation websites. Our colleagues in the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office carry out a survey every year, and 13% of respondents said that within the last 12 months they had been a victim of online crime or identity theft, and another 13% had been a victim of a telephone scam, and that's just within the last year. Really concerningly is that 64%, so 2/3 of the people that were asked, were very or fairly worried about being a victim of online identity fraud. I think at the heart of what we're doing, and prevention has already been mentioned by colleagues earlier, but prevention activity needs to be targeted and it needs to be varied to meet the needs of our community. We have been limited, unfortunately, over the last 2 years in the ways that we can get out into the community, but we have been creative and we've engaged on social media and traditional media. We've delivered training to frontline staff. Very much of this has been online. We have been able to attend community events and meet with community groups. We have still undertaken one-to-one visits after a strict risk assessment, and we've also carried out postal correspondence. Another really key part of our prevention activity, Lincolnshire County Council and Lincolnshire Police have formed a Safer Together partnership, and as part of that partnership, a fraud prevention officer has been appointed within Lincolnshire Police, and their job is to focus on prevention activity across the county. And this role complements the post hosted within Lincolnshire County Council of a scams prevention and intervention officer, and that person is able to deal much more on a one-to-one basis with individuals. As has been highlighted already, partnership is key, and no one organisation can tackle fraud successfully alone. Lincolnshire was a founder partner of what's now referred to as the Home Office multi-agency approach to fraud. This was supported by the National Trading Standards Scams team. We were involved in the pilot back in 2019, 2020, and that's now led to the establishment of the Fraud Core Priority Group that I coordinate today. We're very lucky to have a wide membership in our group. We have representatives from across the County Council, from district councils, Lincolnshire Police, voluntary sectors, Citizens Advice, thank you very much, Jenny, and Age UK. We have representatives from the Police and Crime Commissioner's Office, again in multiple roles, victim links, victim support, and representatives from the banking industry. And there probably are more. Thanks, Kiara. So we need to make sure that our victims receive client-centred support. This is to help avoid repeat victimisation, but also to support their health and well-being. So we've noted that there's a significant impact there. So in the last financial year, our Scams Prevention and Intervention Officer supported 70 individuals who were considered the most vulnerable. The kinds of victims he was supporting were people that had been victims of romance fraud when they had faced grooming, victims of doorstep crime, those sorts of things. And then just finally, a couple of tools in our pocket that are able to empower people to protect themselves. We have the use of call blockers and no cold calling zones across the county. And then just finally, I hope the report that you've read demonstrates the positive contribution that County Council is making to the fraud agenda and the efforts that are being made to keep vulnerable people safe. And just a little plug, if I may, Chairman, if you're not already, I would encourage you to become a friend against scams. The National Trading Standards team are aiming to have 1 million friends against scams. I understand they're about 2 weeks away from that target, so please, if you haven't, be a friend against scams.
Well, there you go. There's some encouragement there. Any questions? Councillor Mr. Clark.
Thank you very much, Chairman. On page 59, you mentioned your police fraud prevention officer, and you mentioned that it had helped roughly 70 people. Do we know how many sessions he's managed to give to the various groups or organisations? And similarly, how would organisations find him? Thank you.
A tiny correction, there's 2 different roles. So there's the fraud prevention officer within Lincolnshire Police, and that person delivers the community-based activity or the staff training. And I'm really sorry I don't have those figures today, but I can get them for you. And then the other person that's seen the 70 individuals is the Scams Prevention and Intervention Officer. The titles are very similar, aren't they? And that person sees the individuals on a one-to-one basis. So those individuals would be referred directly to that officer through referrals from Action Fraud, referrals through the Citizens Advice Consumer Service, Adult Social Care make referrals to that individual. So they come from a number of sources. And in terms of the community activity, at the moment it's very much led by requests for service, but we are moving to an approach now where we're contacting people and asking them, would you like a talk, looking for areas that we know and that we recognise could be problematic. So we're trying to be more proactive in that way.
Right, thank you very much. And I also noted your link that you'd put up there. Could that possibly be sent round to all of us as a reminder? Because it did seem to be a very useful tool. Thank you.
Definitely.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashton.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. Really interested in what you're saying just there about Friends Against Scams, and also that you're offering, you're making yourself available to go out into the community and give talks. Could I encourage you to involve as much as possible town and parish councils? These are a huge resource of incredibly keen people, and for getting that message out there into parish magazines, into that kind of publication at that community level is a really good way of trying to, in my view, of trying to reach people who may very well read the parish magazine but not the internet. And it just feels a really good opportunity to get a lot of people on side. And I'm sure there are, I mean, we're probably missing the annual parish meeting season at the moment, but I know that town and parish councils out there are always looking for things to do on an annual parish meeting rather than drop it in on the same night as a council meeting. And actually something like you're suggesting there would fit that bill really, really well. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Sneath.
Thank you, Chair. Interesting. I'm particularly interested to see you work a lot with banking organisations. I'm not entirely sure that's wise, following an incident I witnessed recently in my local bank in a market town. I won't say what bank or what town. I was in the queue. I wanted to remove a small amount of cash from my account. Apparently it takes 24 hours to count out 10 £5 notes, but anyway, that's not the issue. I was behind an elderly lady in a wheelchair, and the bank needed some information from her. Some neighbours of hers had brought her in. I know where she lives because I stood in the queue behind her and heard, first question was, what's your mother's maiden name? Well, this lady must have been in her 90s. And she couldn't remember her mother's maiden name. She eventually did. I could have made a note. I also could have made a note of her address, her phone number, and other various personal details. If I were a scammer, I'm well set for that elderly lady. Obviously, I didn't make notes, but I just think sometimes what's said and what's actually done on the ground are two quite different matters. She should have been in a private room. She was so vulnerable. She was in her 90s. I know her birth date. So I'm just saying, I think we've just got to be aware that actually, yeah, we can read a lot of fancy leaflets. In fact, as she left, they offered her a leaflet on scams. I thought, too little, too late. Anyway, sorry, it's just a bit of a moan there, but I just think that's really important. Thank you.
Yeah. Martin, I believe you'd like to come in on that.
I know you, sorry, I know you mentioned you didn't want to divulge where that was, and maybe not here, but maybe we can have a conversation afterwards, because I would like to feed that back to the Institute, because they do need to take protective measures.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Danny.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Councillor Sneath. What I was going to talk about actually is more or less the same. I mean, our reality now, our data, our information are sold to a lot of companies. And for me, why the government's not doing anything about that? So to somebody to fraud or steal from someone, it becomes easier. So the government should put new legislations on these matters. There is people who call you at 9 o'clock at night, calling themselves from special companies, and basically they just disturb you, and they are trying to fraud you in some money or something. So I think we should put pressure on the government to really stop these things. I mean, we cannot be sold. Everywhere you go now, they ask you for different, information. What's your mother maiden's name, your date of birth. And I totally agree with you. Sometimes in the bank, I think the staff, they're not well trained. They just go for it. And anybody can pick anything. So that's one of my points. The second thing, I was watching yesterday, I think, the program in the morning, 8 o'clock, which is, Fraud Britain, which has different name. There is different ways now of, there is like a phone spoofing or something like that, which is they call you with the same number of your bank. And I think the banks should make people aware that there is no connection between that and their work. If the banks want to protect their client, they should send them letters, not call them by phone. And I think some people, they fall for that. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Would either Vicky or Martin like to come back on that one? Martin?
You make some really valid points about how do we legitimise ourselves. You even mentioned sending a letter. That's also fraught with danger, because I could put any telephone number on there to call it and wrap that up as a business. So it's really, really hard for organisations to legitimise themselves online and also over phone calls or the key messages. And you see it a lot. They do get pumped out. My bank will never ask you for your PIN number. My bank will never ask you for your date of birth. And this is remotely, taking the councillor's point that they did it in person at the bank. It's those messages that need to get through, but they're really hard messages to give out. It's a huge challenge. I don't shy away from the fact that there is a lot of activity that needs to do at the baseline level to reinforce that message almost on a daily basis. It's something that we can take away. The government do a lot. We do. The telephone issue is. I think Vicky mentioned it around the no-call cold zones that we do in person, but we've also got the telephone blockers. We need to make sure they are around the county, they are being used, and we can block those type of telephone calls coming into people and coming into areas. So it's their work we do, but it's really a difficult message to say, how do I legitimise myself when someone is phoning me? Well, we've got to stop the phone calls, and we've got to work out a better way of how we can trust that phone call to be a legitimate one.
Yeah, very concerning, and they seem to have access to bank accounts without giving any details away. I know once I got some money taken out of my account. Wasn't a very big concern because I've not got a lot in there, but I noticed £1 went out, and next day a bit more went out, and when I phoned the bank up, they wanted to know my date of birth, and I told them, they said, no, that's not your date of birth, that's not what I got here. Want to know my address, I told them that, and it was, no, that's not your address, I'm afraid, yeah. Then they blocked me, and I was the innocent one, yeah. So there's some clever people out there who can...
something we could look at again, or I don't know whether there's any plans to.
We had a meeting a couple of weeks ago, myself with Vicky actually, and some of the actions that we want to take forward around the prevention measures and what recognising that telephone calls was an issue. So we'll be certainly looking to put together something around where we're getting more of that equipment out into the communities.
Thank you. Councillor Rowe.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think one of the best defences against this is actually education. And we as councillors, most of us have got social media of some sort or other. We can go onto the LCC Facebook page, do a search on scams and information on no end of scams come up. There's 70 councillors. If all 70 councillors spread that across all the different Facebook pages they have, across Twitter, etc., then we'll get the word out. Well, Councillor Ashton mentioned Vicky maybe getting information to parish and district councils and town councils, but actually we as councillors visit nearly every parish and district council. If we can get that information out to every one of those councils, then that is an awful lot more people who've got Facebook, who've got Twitter, etc., where they can publish it. The Friends Against Scams is another good site that'll give you information that you can share. So I encourage councillors, if they would, to look for this information. It's not too difficult to find, and then spread it and share it as widely as they can. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, thank you, Councillor Rowe. So I take that's noted, Vicky. We'll look out for stuff, but if you could send it to us too in a easily shared way, that would be very beneficial. Martin, sorry.
Yeah, I was just going to commit to say that we could probably put something together that can be easily distributed around Twitter, Facebook, you know, so you could just almost retweet, resend, redo something within your own. That make it a lot easier.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Brockway.
Yeah, thank you very much. I'm delighted that you're picking up that point by Councillor Sneath. I think that's very, very important. And it's one of those pieces of anecdotal evidence which really does need to be shared with a number of organisations. I've recently experienced one where, not personally, where an organisation sent wrong information or sent information to two people of the same name, sent it the wrong way round, and could have seriously scuppered a business deal. So the thing I wanted to raise mainly was about carelessness of these organisations enabling fraud, which follows on from you. A bit more than a year ago, I was heavily involved in helping the police with a particularly nasty fraud. And one thing that did emerge, Chairman, was the bank's carelessness in checking. You know, they admitted during the process, some of them admitted that they don't bother check the signatures on checks. They let fraudulent signature again and again and again go through. Even when they had picked up potential fraud, they still allowed it to carry on going through. And when we challenged them on this, they said it's cheaper just to pay the money back than it is to actually pick it up. And to get people checking. It was a disgraceful attitude, and they make it very, very difficult. They're not keen to help you sort the fraud either. So I would say that the banks, you know, I'd be very happy to give you that information actually, because it was a salutary experience. I will say that the Lincolnshire police were absolutely superb, and I would advise anybody in Lincolnshire who is defrauded to contact them, because they do bend over backwards. Two other points I wanted to make very briefly. I think it's very important that while we're working with our partners to prevent fraud, that we do take to heart the effect it has. It can affect people for months and years. They feel stupid, they feel vulnerable, they worry about locking their house at night, even when the fraud is nothing to do with their homes. The effects can be massive and long-term, mental health and even physically. I'd be very keen to emphasise that part of what we're doing. And just one quick question. I wasn't clear on something. I'm sure I've just missed it. On page 58 and in the slides, we talked about a 27% rise in fraud offences to 413,417 offences. Is that all the fraud offences that Action Fraud has picked up in England and Wales? Does that figure? I just want to be sure what it's referring to. Please.
Vicky, are you able to answer that?
I think it was all the fraud offences reported to Action Fraud in that time period, yeah. But if you want me to go back and triple check the route, I can do that if you'd like me to.
Thank you. I would be interested to know if that was the ones reported just one organisation, because a lot of people don't report to Action Fraud, and I'd be interested to know what the figures are nationally, if that's possible, or if that's too big an ask, then I'll do my own research. Thank you.
That was definitely only to Action Fraud, and I agree with you, there are multiple routes to reporting, and one of the things we're looking at is where do people report and why do they choose to report to who they do. So thank you for that comment.
Okay, thank you. A few years back, Vicky, it brought to this committee about concerns with cold callers. I think it was Nottingham knockers and alleged fish sellers. Is that still rife in the county? Is that still a problem? Mark, this time. Over to you, Mark.
We still get sporadic reports about both, if I'm honest. The message is getting out there, and there has been some action taken in the northeast of the country, the northeast region, looking at fish sellers, because that's where they tend to come down from. But yeah, we still do get odd reports for both of those.
Okay, thank you. Any further comments? No. Okay, so thank you for your questions and comments. That now concludes the discussion of this item. Like before, I'll move that we endorse the report and presentation received, and that we are satisfied with the activity reported. Further, I request that our comments from the discussion as recorded are taken under consideration for continuing to effectively deliver the partnership's duties. Can you please raise your hand if you agree? Yeah, I think that's everyone. Okay, that's everyone. Thank you. That now brings us to the end of the meeting, so that concludes the business of the day. Thank you for your attendance, everyone, and you may now leave the council chamber. Thank you very much.